Hello, welcome back to episode 6 of 10,000 Steps with Baby. This episode is on breastfeeding this week. Please bear with me. We're on week 4 now of my baby waking up every 1 to 2 hours overnight. So I don't really know what's going on. This might not make a lot of sense, but here we go. So, breastfeeding. This has got to be the most Instagram versus reality aspect of having a baby, in my opinion. Before having kids, the only sort of images of breastfeeding that I was exposed to was, a woman in a soft blue cashmere jumper, gently cradling a tiny bundle in her arms, and she's smiling down at them. And my brain never processed anything other than this image that was what breastfeeding was like. It was easy and relaxing, it was clean, it was calm. And when you're preparing for having a baby, you learn lots and lots about everything, how to look after a newborn and what clothes they should wear to bed and how to bath them, whatever. And you learn loads about labor and the process of birth and your different options. But when it comes to feeding, and this is just my experience, they ask you at one of your antenatal visits if you plan on breastfeeding or formula feeding, and they sort of tick a box, and that's that. And we were lucky that with my first, we did the NCT classes, which, if you're not in the UK, is the National Childbirth Trust. And it's sort of these classes for expectant parents that most people use really just to find some friends for maternity leave. And one of the sessions that they did was all about breastfeeding. And I really wanted to breastfeed. So I was all ears for this 6 hour session. And by the end of it, my head was just spinning. But I had duly learned about how to do the nipple flip and the correct latch positions and the different holds. And as you may have guessed from previous episodes, I'm a bit of a type A personality. And I approached this like an exam in school, where if I had all the information and the right notes, it would be fine. And then my son was born via forceps, and it was a long and difficult delivery, and there had been some problems at the end, but they eventually brought him to me, and the neonatal doctor came with him and said that he'd had some damage to the nerves in his face. It was a facial nerve palsy for the official term. And I could see, looking at him, that one of his eyes wouldn't shut and his mouth was droopy on one side. And the doctor said that he probably wouldn't be able to breastfeed for a few days while the nerve sort of repaired itself. So they said, oh, we'll give you some syringes and you can hand express and collect colostrum and give it to him that way. So boom goes my first idea of lovingly feeding my newborn after he was born, like I'd had in my head and seen in the movies. And instead, Jack spent the next hour or so trying to squeeze my boob with a tiny syringe in his hand, which was as glamorous and fun as it sounds. And then, of course, he had to leave for the night, and I was left trying to work out how to hold a baby, which I was still figuring out how to do, and, use my other 3 hands to pump and soak up the colostrum. And I just completely abandoned this really quickly because it was it was impossible. And I decided to just hold James near my nipple and see if anything came of it. And to my surprise, he latched on and had a feed, and he did that pretty much continuously the first night. So I was really pleased, but then I thought, oh, I am breastfeeding. Time to put all my knowledge to work. So I was examining the latch, and if it wasn't great, I would take him off and try again because the course had told me that if you don't have a perfect latch, you'll get terrible nipple pain and you'll have to stop feeding. And I would be desperately trying to arrange him so he was in the perfect position with his chin tucked and tummy to tummy and nose to nipple and all these things. And the more I tried, the worse it got. It had been fine that first night, but now I was just overthinking it so much and trying so hard to follow all the rules that I was just completely floundering. And of course, despite trying to have the perfect techniques and to do everything the right way, I still had sore nipples because I had never had a baby, with a suck like a Dyson on them for 23 hours a day for a whole week. And I remember speaking to my mum and being like, okay, wow, I didn't realize it was this hard. And she said to me, like, look, if you can make it to 10 days, it'll get 80% easier. And after 2 weeks, it'll probably feel like a doddle. And I would never tell her this, but she was right. The thing that eventually helped me was to stop trying as much. I just put him in a position that felt comfy to hold him, and I just put my nipple near his mouth. And yeah, my nipples were sore, and I had that horrible sensation when the milk comes in that you've got these like hot rocks like on your chest. But it did over the course of probably 2 weeks just get a lot easier until it felt, yeah, just really easy and simple and just natural to do. I didn't have to think about it anymore. And I just want to say that that is in no way advice because, there's access to people like lactation consultants and there's breastfeeding support people if you're having any issues who can give you some really good advice. And I'm sure they wouldn't tell you to do that. But that is just what worked for me. It was that sort of relaxing into it and sort of not trying to overthink it was the key for me to getting it started. And of course, like when you're pregnant, everyone talks about and focuses on sort of the first 6 weeks, and everyone says about all the things you have to learn and do then, and no one can really tells you about anything that comes after that time. And so I didn't realize when the milk came in properly, probably on day 4 or 5, it would just randomly start like pouring out just for weeks afterwards. Like I would just be doing nothing at all, um, and then just milk would start flooding out. I remember like standing in my kitchen, talking to my father-in-law, and I could see him like sort of surreptitiously glancing down at my chest. And I looked down, and I had these two huge wet circles on my top, and this was embarrassing the first time it happened. And then I realized it would happen to every top I would wear for the next 8 weeks, even when I was using breast pads. So I just gave up caring and just walked around like that. Then there was being sticky all the time. While my milk supply was regulating, I would just regularly wake up in just a huge puddle of milk in the bed. I had used to have to sleep with my chest on a couple of towels, and still the bed sheets were crusty and they were smell like off milk after a night. That did settle down fairly quickly, probably about 2 months, maybe 3 months. I can't really remember. But by the time that is all starting to settle, usually your baby is then in that stage where they are just interested in everything around them. They can see the world a lot more clearly and they're just, they want to do everything but sort of focus on feeding. And you get to the stage where they'll be happily latched, they'll be feeding away, and then anything, and I mean anything, like a shadow or like a small noise will grab their attention and they whip their head around to have a look. And they usually take your nipple with them. And like, my God, that is an experience. To watch your poor nipple being stretched by about 4 inches because of your overly curious baby. And then, of course, everyone just then gets to admire your boob, which is now completely on display because the baby's off looking around, looking at whatever has caught their attention. um, and it takes some getting used to about just getting your boobs out in public all the time. It's not something most people are used to before they're breastfeeding. And I've always really admired the women I've seen who manage to sort of gracefully feed their baby under a muslin or a cover because I could just never work out how to do that. I either just couldn't see what was going on down there, or baby would just yank it off after 2 seconds. It was completely pointless for me. Um, and I found it kind of awkward at the start, when it's always, in fact, it was always men. They would be trying really hard not to look, and they would just end up making this really intense eye contact with you, which was so much weirder. And a couple of times with some like male friends or male family members, I've had to say, yeah, by the way, I know you're looking at the baby. I know you're not looking at my boobs. You can just look. Don't worry about it. And that's helped to break the ice and stop the weird, intense stares. And then, yeah, there's teething. I have never had such fear in my life as when James had his first couple of teeth come in. Um, and he would give these like experimental like chews on my nipple sometimes, and my whole body would tense up. But he actually only bit me once, and the internet will tell you that if your baby bites you while feeding, not to react that much. Otherwise, they'll think it's funny or a game and do it again. And I don't know who wrote that. I assume a man, because believe me, you react when someone suddenly chomps down on your boob. I flew about 4 feet in the air, and James, of course, found it hilarious. But I don't know if it was luck, but he never did it again. So go figure. The second time around, definitely a lot easier. Definitely a lot easier. I knew what I was doing this time, and I was happy with my sort of personal approach of not bothering with perfect technique or positioning. I was also mentally prepared for the cluster feeding, and I had got prepped. So I had my TV show, which was Selling Sunset. I watched all episodes of that back to back, over the middle of the night. That was a great show for mindless watching. I got a huge 2 litre water bottle, and I got loads and loads of snacks in. And I would just stockpile it all on the couch and just pretty much set myself up for kind of not sleeping that first entire week, but just being prepared for the cluster feeding of just on and off all night. And yeah, just knowing that that was going to happen and knowing that it would end was a lot easier. And I also had the sort of understanding that I didn't have the first time around about what sort of newborn babies feed like. So I knew I was making, colostrum only, and even though it's tiny amounts, it's really filling, it's really rich, and that newborn babies' stomachs are about the size of a cherry. So that's why they are really only having like a meal or two at a time, and they're having that every 5-10 minutes. So I didn't have all those fears that I had the first time of, oh, she seems hungry all the time. She doesn't seem full. Why is she needing a feed every 10 minutes? Is it because I'm not doing something right? Or should I be giving her a bottle of formula? So, yeah, just sort of having that information was really handy and helped to get rid of some of those worries. Um, yeah, because I had all those usual fears with James. Oh, is he waking up this often because he's starving, or am I not doing it properly, or am I not making enough milk or colostrum? And in the middle of the night, you're usually on your own in these scenarios, and it's really hard to keep those thoughts at bay or to rationalize them, even when you've been given all of that information, which quite often you haven't. Is my experience. So, and there was a woman I was in a 4B little room when I had Alba. We stayed in overnight, and the woman in the bay next to me, she must have had her first baby probably 12 or 24 hours before I had Alba. And I never even saw this lady's face because we'd all closed our curtains for privacy. But obviously, you can hear everything. And that night, her husband and family left, as they have to do. And we were in the same boat, and she was trying to breastfeed her baby, but he was just in that completely normal stage of wanting to feed all the time, and she was learning how to do it. And this just continued all night. And me and Alba were going through the exact same things, but like I said, I'd known that this was going to happen, and I had a bit more confidence this time round. And I heard her crying a couple of times in the night, and calling her husband in tears, and I think she called her mum as well. And I kept debating for ages about whether I should pop my head round and just say to her, "Oh yeah, don't worry, I'm doing the exact same thing over here. It's not you. It's not something that you're doing wrong." Um, but I kind of decided at the time that it would be a bit intrusive and not welcome when she was having a hard time, because you all know that if you're in the thick of something and someone tells you, "Oh, it's going to get better," or it kind of makes you want to murder them. So I didn't do it, and I regret that now. I think it might have been helpful for her to hear that she wasn't doing anything wrong, and that I was doing the same thing, and we would both survive, and her baby would be absolutely fine. Some tips I've learned. So I've talked about that hot rock feeling when your milk comes in. It's pretty horrible for a couple of days, to be honest. I had some gel breast pads. I think they were from Lancino, and you could either heat them up in the microwave or put them in the fridge, depending on what you wanted, if you wanted them hot or cold. And they were really good. I also used their nipple cream the first time around and found that really useful. This isn't sponsored by Lancino, by the way. And I used a Haka with James to try and catch some of the milk that was kind of coming out of my other boob when I was feeding him. But I was putting it on under a lot of suction, which was causing me to express milk. And I ended up with an oversupply because I didn't realize that that's what was happening. So that's just something to watch out for if you want to use a hacket. It needs to be kind of just on your boob rather than sucked hard onto your boob, if that makes sense. And the other thing I would suggest is trying to master side lying feeding as soon as you can. That made all those middle of the night feeds so much better because you don't have to sit fully up and you can just lie in the bed with them and have the feed. Well, I really preferred that. Just watch out what your other boob is doing while you're feeding, because quite a few times I had to change James's whole outfit in the middle of the night because I didn't realize that my other boob than the one he was feeding on was pressed up on his sleep suit and soaking it. Um, yeah, maybe I'm the only person that's happened to, but it was really annoying. So if you want to pump extra, don't be scared if you're not feeding your baby enough, if not much comes out. So both James and Alba, they've so far had really good weight gain, and I didn't really have any concerns that I wasn't producing enough milk. But when I tried to pump because I wanted to have, say, go out for a few hours and have some milk ready for them to have, it the pumping thing just didn't really work for me. It would take me ages to produce even a small amount, and I think that freaks out some people. And they think, oh, I'm not making enough, but just pumps, even the best pump in the world, is not as efficient as a baby is at getting milk out. I wouldn't worry about that. Especially as I see a lot of TikTok videos now where it's like, come pump with me, and then someone produces a gallon of milk. And I think that's just a weird comparison you don't need. So yeah, breastfeeding, it's really hard. And, of course, there's lots of lovely advantages. You don't have to clean and sterilize bottles. Breastfed baby poops smell better, I swear. And every so often, babies give you this like little pat on the boob while they're feeding, and it's like they're saying, "Yeah, good job." And there's definitely not enough support offered unless you go looking for it, but it does exist. And of course, it's 100% true that the best thing for your baby is having a happy mum. So if breastfeeding is making you miserable and switching to formula would make you happier or your life easier, then of course you should do that and not feel stressed out by all the crappy, contradictory pressures that the world puts on mums. A happy baby starts with a happy mum, in my opinion. So I think you should do whatever works best for you. So thank you so much for listening. And 10,000 Steps with Baby has its own Instagram page now. So please go and follow. And feel free to send me a DM if I can help in any way, or if you wanted to ask any questions or have any comments. I'd love to hear it. And so, yeah, thank you. Next episode will be out next week, and it's going to be on returning to work after mat leave.